The old city park was always full of noise, laughter, and people trying to escape their busy lives. Children ran around the fountain, couples sat on the benches, and joggers passed through without stopping. In one quiet corner stood an old wooden piano. It had chipped paint, missing keys, and a faint smell of dust and rain. Most people walked by it without a second glance. Some joked about it, calling it a useless piece of furniture. Others tried to play it, but stopped after a few wrong notes, laughing as if it were a toy. The piano had become a forgotten thing, just another decoration in the park. One late afternoon, when the sun was soft and the breeze gentle, a quiet man walked into the park. He looked like someone who had lived many different days, some good, some heavy. His clothes were simple, a bit worn at the sleeves, and he carried a small old backpack that looked important to him. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, observing the ground, the trees, the people around him. No one noticed him at first because he blended in like a passing shadow. He reached the corner where the old piano stood. The wood was scratched from years of weather and use. A few teens were sitting nearby, talking loudly and scrolling on their phones. An elderly couple rested on the bench, feeding a few birds. The group of friends sat on the grass joking about something. Life was moving normally. The man stood still in front of the piano. He wasn't sure if he should approach it yet. He looked at it like someone looking at a memory. Someone trying to decide whether to open an old door. His hands hung by his sides, almost unsure of themselves. His eyes had a softness to them, like he was remembering someone or something from long ago. After a long moment, he took a gentle step closer. The teens noticed him and nudged one another. They didn't expect much from him. He looked quiet, maybe even a little tired. One of them said something under their breath, and the others laughed. Nothing cruel, but still enough that the man heard it. He didn't react. He finally spoke in a low voice, almost as if asking permission not from the people, but from the world itself. "Can I play that old piano?" His voice was calm and carried a kind of honesty that didn't match the laughter around him. The teens exchanged looks. One shrugged dramatically and said, "If you want, go ahead. It barely works." Another laughed, expecting it to be funny to watch. A few others nearby turned their heads with mild interest. The man didn't seem bothered. He gave a small polite smile, not too wide, just enough to acknowledge them. He walked closer, gently brushing his hand along the top of the piano. The wood was rough and cold. He lifted the fallboard slowly, revealing uneven keys, some yellow, some cracked, a few missing entirely. People who had passed by earlier didn't think of the piano as anything special, but to him, it meant something. He reached out and touched one of the keys. It made a dull, broken sound. A couple of teens laughed again. The sound of the piano was not perfect, but it didn't bother him. It was as if he expected it. He pressed another key, then another, testing them softly. Each note told him what the instrument had been through: rain, dust, careless hands, long nights forgotten. For a moment, he stood in silence with his fingers resting on the keys. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of cars and chatter. The park felt busy, but around him, everything slowed. His shoulders rose gently with a long breath, as though he were preparing himself for something important. It wasn't that he wanted attention. In fact, he preferred it if no one watched. He wasn't someone who liked crowds or eyes on him, but the piano called to him in a way he couldn't ignore. There was a pull inside him, something familiar and warm, like a voice from the past telling him to try again. He lowered his head slightly, letting the noise of people fade into the background. The old piano stood before him, imperfect but waiting. He moved the small loose bench and sat down carefully. The wood creaked under him. A few kids stopped running and stared. The elderly couple paused their bird feeding and watched with curious eyes. The teens kept their phones out, one of them holding it up, expecting to record something funny. They had seen others sit at this piano before, banging random keys or pretending to play. They thought this man would do the same, but he didn't look like someone who wanted to joke. He looked like someone trying to gather a piece of himself. He rested his hands gently on the keys. His fingers were thin but steady. The way he placed them felt practiced, not random. Even the smallest movement of his hands showed a kind of quiet confidence. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, as if listening to a memory rather than the world around him. He could hear the soft laughter around him, the whispering, but he let it drift away. His mind was not in the park anymore. It went somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere painful, somewhere important. Nobody knew what this moment meant to him. To the others, he was just a stranger sitting at an old piano. But inside him, something deeper was happening. Something he had held back for years was slowly rising, asking to be let out. For him, playing the piano was never just about music. It was like speaking without words, remembering without trying, breathing without effort. It was a part of his story he had locked away, thinking it belonged in the past. Now, sitting at that weathered instrument, he wondered if it was time to open that part of himself again. He lifted his hands just slightly, preparing to play his first real note. The park was still busy, but more people began to notice something about him. Maybe it was the way he sat, or the strange calmness around him. Perhaps it was the quiet respect he showed the old piano, something no one else had done in a long time. The sun dipped lower, giving the surroundings a gentle orange glow. The breeze became softer. The moment felt simple, but important. He didn't rush. He didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't think about the people watching or the laughter behind him. He only thought about the piano and what it meant to him. And as he sat there, hands ready, breath steady, and heart full of something he couldn't explain, the world waited without knowing it, because the moment he touched the keys for real, everything in the park would change. But for now, just for these quiet seconds, he simply sat there, gathering the courage to press the first true note of a song he hadn't played in years. The moment before the first note felt strangely long, as if time itself waited to see what would happen next. The man sat still on the creaking bench, his fingers hovering above the keys of the old piano. People around him expected something ordinary, something simple, maybe even something funny. No one imagined anything more than that. After all, the piano was barely in working condition, and he didn't look like someone who carried much in his pockets, let alone in his past. He pressed the first note gently, testing how the piano would respond. It made a soft, uneven sound. He pressed another key, then another, each one slightly off tune. But he didn't flinch. His face stayed calm, almost peaceful. He was learning the piano all over again, key by key, like someone greeting an old friend after many years apart. A few teens giggled again, thinking he would soon stumble and give up. One whispered loudly, "Watch, he's gonna mess up any second." Another held up the phone a little higher, ready to record what he thought would be a silly moment. But the man stayed steady. He placed both hands gently on the keys. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped slightly as if a weight was leaving him. Then, without any hesitation or show, his fingers moved. The sound that came from the piano wasn't perfect. The keys were damaged, the strings worn, and the body old. Yet somehow, the music that came out carried emotion so deep that people nearby paused. The melody was soft at first, almost like a whisper. But that whisper carried warmth, sadness, hope, and something indescribable, something real. The teens stopped whispering. A few people who were walking past slowed down. A small child tugged on her mother's hand, pointing toward the piano. The elderly couple by the bench paused their bird feeding, their attention now fixed on the man playing. His fingers moved with surprising ease, like they remembered something his mind had been trying to forget. Each note seemed to pull a memory from deep inside him. His face softened, and his eyes closed for a short moment as he let the music guide him. He didn't look like a stranger anymore. He looked like someone stepping back into a world he once knew. The melody grew fuller and smoother as he played. The broken piano keys gave a raw edge to the sound, but that only made the music feel more human, imperfect, yet beautiful. Anyone who listened closely could feel the emotion behind it. The music didn't try to show off. It simply spoke the truth. More park-goers gathered around. Conversations faded. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if listening to. A jogger who had been running past stopped, took out his earphones, and stood beside a tree, drawn by the unusual sound. For the man playing, the world around him disappeared. He wasn't in the park anymore. He wasn't surrounded by strangers or laughter. In his mind, he was somewhere else, maybe a quiet room from his past, maybe next to someone he once loved, maybe in a time when music was part of his everyday life. He continued to play, letting the melody rise and fall like a story being told without words. His hands moved with a mixture of confidence and emotion. Sometimes his expression shifted, like he felt something deeply, maybe pain, maybe hope, maybe both. The longer he played, the more the crowd grew. People sat on the grass, leaned on benches, and stood quietly. No one joked anymore. No one expected to laugh. Even the teens recording looked confused, unsure of how something they thought would be funny had suddenly turned into something meaningful. The man finally opened his eyes and glanced at the piano. His fingers slowed, but they didn't stop. He shifted into a gentler part of the tune, something soft and tender. The air felt different, almost heavy with emotion. A little boy walked closer, Stopping just a few feet from the piano, he watched the man with wide eyes, fascinated by the movement of his hands. The man noticed the child and gave him the smallest smile. Then he returned to the melody, letting it speak again nearby. A woman who had been on her way home paused and wiped her eyes. She didn't know why the music touched her, but it did. It felt like it carried a story, even though she didn't know whose story it was. One of the teens finally whispered, "He's actually good." The others didn't reply. They were too focused on the music. The melody shifted again, becoming deeper, more emotional. It held a kind of ache, like someone remembering something precious and painful at the same time. Even those who knew nothing about music felt something they couldn't explain. Minutes passed, though no one noticed time slipping by. The sun continued to lower in the sky, casting soft golden light across the park. The breeze carried the music farther than anyone expected, reaching the ears of people sitting far off on the grass. The man's expression changed again. His brows drew in just slightly, as if he were feeling something sharp inside. But he kept playing, letting the music carry that feeling instead of words. No one knew his story. No one knew why he had approached the piano that day. To the crowd, he had arrived like any other visitor, blending into the background. But now he stood at the center of a moment they would remember. When the melody reached a gentle peak, the man's hands slowed once more. The notes softened, falling lightly like raindrops. Some keys made muted sounds, others rang a bit unevenly. But even those imperfect tones added something special, something real. The crowd remained silent. Even children, who normally couldn't stay still, watched quietly. The man lowered his head slightly as he played the final part of the piece. His expression held peace now, mixed with something like relief. The last few notes lingered in the air longer than expected, stretching out like a soft goodbye. Then, with a slow breath, he lifted his hands from the keys. The park stayed silent for a moment. No one clapped right away because they were caught in the softness of the moment. It felt wrong to break it too quickly. The man looked at the piano with gentle eyes, as if thanking it for letting him return to something he had once lost. His hands rested on his lap, trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from the weight of the emotion he had just released. A soft breeze passed through, rustling the leaves and carrying the fading echo of the melody. Finally, someone near the back clapped quietly, then another, and then the whole crowd joined in, soft at first, then growing warmer. The man looked up, surprised. He hadn't expected applause. He hadn't expected anyone to care. But they did. A young woman stepped forward and asked gently, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The man hesitated. His eyes lowered for a moment, and it was clear the question touched something deep inside him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the old piano again, running his fingers lightly across the edge of the wood as if searching for the right words. The crowd waited quietly. Finally, he whispered, "A long time ago, when life felt different." He didn't explain more, not yet. He wasn't ready. But something in his tone made everyone understand that there was a story inside him, one that hadn't been told in years. And though they didn't know it yet, that story would soon begin to unfold right there in the park, beside an old piano no one cared about until he touched it. The moment after the music stopped felt almost heavier than the moment before it began. The crowd stood in a quiet cloud of emotion, unsure of what exactly they had just witnessed. The man sitting at the old piano still hadn't fully returned to the world around him. His breathing was steady, his eyes soft, and his hands rested on his lap like they no longer knew what to do now that the music was gone. He glanced up at the people staring at him. Some had smiles, some had gentle eyes, and a few looked surprisingly moved. It was strange to him. He had approached the piano expecting nothing, maybe even expecting to embarrass himself. But now all these people were waiting for him to say something, to explain something that he hadn't spoken about in years. The young woman who had asked the question earlier took a small step closer, careful not to disturb the quiet mood. She repeated softly, "You're playing." It felt like it came from someplace deep. "Did you learn on your own?" The man gave a faint smile, not a proud one, more like a tired one. He shook his head slowly. "Someone taught me," he whispered. The crowd leaned in without moving their feet. There was curiosity, but it wasn't the shallow kind. It was warm, respectful. But the man wasn't ready to share more, not yet. He stood from the bench, and the piano creaked slightly as he moved away from it. The crowd parted gently to give him space. Some people thought he might walk away, but he didn't. Instead, he stood beside the piano and placed a hand on its side, as if grounding himself. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, walked up to him slowly. He had been watching the entire time, his eyes full of wonder. The boy tugged at the man's sleeve with innocent curiosity. "Sir," the boy asked softly, "how did you make it sound like that? The piano is so old." But it sounded nice. The man bent down a little to be at the boy's eye level. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "It's not the piano," he said. "It's the memories you play with it." The boy didn't fully understand, but he smiled anyway. The man smiled back, a soft, genuine smile that held warmth. A few people nearby felt their hearts melt a little at the sight. The teens who had been recording earlier now slowly lowered their phones. They looked at each other awkwardly, embarrassed by their earlier laughter. One of them stepped forward and cleared his throat. Sorry if we bothered you," the teen muttered. "We didn't know you could actually play like that." The man nodded with understanding, not anger. "It's all right," he said. "We all make quick judgments. Sometimes we just don't see the whole picture at first." His response surprised them. They expected annoyance or maybe a lecture. Instead, he gave them patience. The crowd around him slowly settled, sitting on the grass or leaning on the nearby benches. They weren't ready to leave yet. They felt something delicate in the air, like a story waiting to unfold. The man's hands trembled slightly as he held the edge of the piano. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of old memories pushing their way back into his heart. He looked at the piano again, and for a moment, the scene around him faded. His mind drifted back to a small room from many years earlier, filled with warm sunlight and soft laughter. He remembered hands guiding his across the keys, gentle, patient hands. He remembered someone encouraging him to keep playing even when he stumbled. A long breath escaped him before he spoke again. "I used to play," he said softly, "a long time ago." A man from the crowd asked, "Were you a performer? You play like someone who used to be on stage." The man shook his head slowly. "No, I was never famous. I played because it meant something to someone I loved." There was a pause. The crowd stayed quiet, not wanting to push him too hard. He continued, choosing his words carefully. "I learned from someone very close to me, someone who believed music could heal things we didn't know how to fix." His eyes lifted toward the fading sky, as if searching for something far away. "But I stopped," he added in a quieter voice. "Life changed, things happened, and the music, it didn't feel the same anymore." The young woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her tone gentle. "Is today the first time you've played in a long while?" He nodded. "Yes," he said. "Many years." That answer alone made a few people gasp softly. The amount of emotion in his playing didn't match someone who had been away from music for years. But grief and memory had a way of keeping certain things alive. He took another breath and sat on the bench again, not to play, but because standing felt heavy. More people joined the growing circle, curious but respectful. The park that usually echoed with noise now felt like a quiet room, everyone waiting gently. The man didn't speak right away. His eyes stared forward, but his mind drifted back. He remembered moments of practicing late at night, trying to repeat melodies until they felt right. He remembered laughter at the mistakes, soft hands correcting his posture, and a warm voice telling him to try again. He remembered happiness, and he remembered loss. A middle-aged man in the crowd spoke carefully. "Sometimes music brings back things we think we've forgotten." The piano player nodded, "Yes. And sometimes it brings back things we wish we could forget." The crowd stayed silent. No one rushed him. No one pressured him. They understood that whatever he carried had been locked inside for a very long time. The breeze brushed through the trees, and a few leaves drifted across the ground. The light dimmed as the sun continued to fall. The man finally looked at the crowd and said in a soft but steady voice, "I used to play with someone important to me. We made music together. It was our way of speaking when words felt too small. But when they were gone, the music didn't sound like music anymore. It sounded like an empty room." His throat tightened slightly, but he didn't cry. His voice held honesty without breaking. People in the crowd lowered their eyes, moved by his honesty. He continued, "I couldn't touch the piano after that. Every note reminded me of what I lost. Every melody felt like a memory I wasn't ready to face." The young woman asked softly, "What made you come here today, to this old piano?" He looked at the sky again. "I don't know," he said truthfully. "Maybe I was tired of running from it. Maybe this old piano felt safe because it didn't expect anything from me. Or maybe I just wanted to hear something again." A small boy approached again, holding a dandelion in his hand. He gently placed it beside the man on the bench. "This is for your music," the boy said. It made my heart feel warm. The man looked at the flower, then at the boy, and smiled a smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Something softened inside him, something that hadn't softened in years. The crowd remained around him, but no one tried to force more questions. They simply stayed, giving him silent support. As the sky slowly turned darker, the man placed his hand on the piano again. He didn't play. He just let his fingers rest there. One of the teens finally spoke, his voice awkward but sincere. If you ever want to play more, we'll listen." The man was surprised. He nodded with gratitude. "I might," he said quietly. He stood again, feeling lighter than when he had arrived. Not healed, not fully ready, but a little more open. As he stepped back from the piano, he whispered something so soft that only those closest could hear. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from the music. And though he didn't know it yet, this moment was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change not only his life, but the lives of the people who had witnessed it. The old piano, once ignored and joked about, had opened a door, and he had finally taken the first step through it. Even after the crowd slowly began to scatter, the energy around the old piano did not fade. Something meaningful had happened there, something quiet but powerful. The people who had witnessed the man play walked away with softer expressions, as if they were carrying a warm secret in their hearts. Some whispered about it, others said nothing, simply holding the moment close. The young woman who had spoken earlier stood for a few extra minutes before finally drifting away, glancing back once more as if memorizing the sight. The man remained beside the piano even after the sun had fully dipped below the trees. The sky had turned a gentle blue-gray, and the street lamps flickered on, casting soft halos of light across the park. The crowd was gone now, except for a few people walking dogs or finishing quiet evening strolls. He stayed still for a long time, his hand resting on the top of the old wooden piano. The music he had played still echoed faintly inside him, like the fading warmth of a fire. He didn't feel ready to leave, not yet. Something in him had opened, and it felt unfamiliar but strangely comforting. He finally sat down on the creaking bench again, not to play, but to breathe. The park was calm now. Only a faint rustling of leaves and distant city sounds filled the air. He closed his eyes and let the quiet wrap around him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. After a while, he reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a small cloth pouch. It was old and wrinkled, the corners frayed. He opened it carefully, as if it were something fragile. Inside was a tiny silver key on a faded string. He held it in his hand, the metal cool against his skin. He whispered to himself, "It's been a long time." The key wasn't for a house or a drawer. It was for a music box that had belonged to someone who had once meant everything to him. He hadn't opened it in years. He ran his thumb along the key, feeling old memories stir. It reminded him of evenings when the soft tune of the music box filled a room with warmth. It reminded him of laughter, gentle voices, and moments he never thought would fade, but they had. A soft voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. "Are you okay?" The man looked up. A young boy, the same one who had given him the dandelion earlier, stood near him again. The boy held a small flashlight, its beam pointed at the ground so it wouldn't shine in the man's eyes. The man nodded. "I'm all right. You didn't go home," the boy said innocently. The man smiled. "I'm just thinking." The boy walked closer, his steps small but confident. "My mom said your music made her cry," he said. "But she wasn't sad. She said it felt real." The man looked touched. "That means a lot." The boy sat down on the grass beside him. "Are you gonna play again?" The man looked at the piano, then back at the boy. "Maybe, not tonight, but maybe soon." The boy nodded, as if that answer was good enough. "I liked when you played. It felt like a story without words." The man chuckled softly. "That's what music is sometimes." The boy stood up and waved. Good night," the man replied when the boy left. The man looked at the key in his hand again. The warmth of the boy's presence lingered for a moment, making the loneliness feel less heavy. He slipped the key back into the pouch and tucked it into his backpack. He whispered, "Maybe soon," as if speaking to the memories themselves finally. He stood and walked away from the piano, leaving it sitting quietly under the street lamp. But he didn't go far, only to a bench a few steps away, where he could still see it. He sat there, watching it, as if keeping it company. The next morning, he returned. He arrived early, before the usual park visitors came. The sun had just risen, casting a soft golden light through the trees. Birds hopped around the grass, chirping. The park felt fresh and new. The old piano looked almost different in the morning light, less forgotten, more alive. The man brushed dust off the top gently. He lifted the fall board again and pressed a few keys. The piano responded with the same uneven sounds as the day before, but now those imperfections felt familiar. He sat on the bench, letting the sunlight warm his back. He didn't play this time. He simply sat, listening to the morning dot as the park gradually filled with people. A few recognized him. They smiled, nodded, or whispered quietly. The teens from the previous day walked by slowly, unsure if they should say anything. One of them raised a hand in a shy wave. The man nodded kindly. A woman sitting nearby with a book looked at him and said, "You're the one who played yesterday, right?" He nodded again. "It was beautiful," she said. He smiled politely. "Thank you." She didn't ask anything more, respecting his quietness. Throughout the morning, more people approached, not to ask questions, but to share small moments of warmth, simple compliments, soft smiles, quiet gratitude. Each interaction loosened something inside him, piece by piece. Around noon, a street photographer approached him with a gentle, respectful energy. He carried an old camera around his neck and had kind eyes. "May I take a photo of you with the piano?" The photographer asked softly. "Not for anything big, just it's a beautiful moment." The man hesitated, then nodded. He stood beside the piano as the photographer took a few pictures. The photographer showed him the results: a soft, genuine image of a man and an old piano bathed in sunlight. "It captures something real," the photographer said. "Maybe," the man replied quietly. The photographer didn't push further and walked away with a smile. Later that afternoon, the young woman from the night before returned. She carried a small cup of tea. "I thought you might like something warm," she said. The man accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you." She sat on the bench beside him. "Do you mind if I sit for a moment?" "Not at all," he replied. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea and listening to the breeze. Finally, she spoke. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you ever think about playing again? Not just here, I mean, really playing." The man looked at his hands. They were steady now, not trembling like the night before. "I'm not sure if I can," he said. "Not the way I used to." "Maybe it doesn't have to be the same way," she said softly. "Maybe it can be something new." He didn't answer, but something about her words lingered in him. A little later, she left with a gentle wave. As the sun began to set, the man approached the piano once more. He sat on the bench, watching the orange light reflect on the keys. This time, he didn't hesitate. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. The first note he played was soft, almost hesitant, but the next was stronger. The melody that followed wasn't the one from the previous day. It was different, lighter, hopeful, like morning light instead of fading sunset. People nearby stopped again. They recognized him. They recognized the feeling in the music. His hands moved more confidently, as if something inside him was waking up. With each note, the music felt less like a memory and more like a beginning. By the time he finished, a soft crowd had gathered again, forming a half circle around him. He looked at them, surprised but not overwhelmed this time. A small girl stepped forward. "Did you make that song?" The man nodded. "Yes, just now. It sounded happy," she said. He smiled. "Maybe I'm starting to feel that way." The crowd smiled with him, and as the sky darkened and the cool evening settled in, the man realized something he had not felt in years. He was ready to keep playing, not for applause, not for attention, not for the past, but for life again. The news of the park performance kept spreading, and the days that followed did not feel real for him. He had gone back to his quiet routine, the same small room he lived in, the same gentle mornings where he made tea and sat by the window. He didn't expect anything new to come from that moment by the old piano. He didn't even imagine people would remember him. To him, it had simply been a moment of courage, a small step back towards something he once loved. But life had other plans. He woke up the next morning to a message on his old phone from a young man who had recorded the performance. The message said that the video had gone viral overnight. Thousands of people had shared it, calling it the most beautiful piano playing they had heard in years. Many said they cried while watching. Others said they didn't know someone could make broken keys sound so alive. There were endless comments filled with warmth, admiration, and questions about who he was. At first, he didn't know how to feel about it. He wasn't used to attention. He had spent years trying not to be seen, choosing quiet corners and empty hours where he wouldn't draw a single eye. But now the world wanted to know him. It felt strange, almost unreal. Still, there was something comforting in knowing that people had not laughed at him. Instead, they had felt something deep in the music he played. Later that day, when he walked through the park again, things looked different. People recognized him. A group sitting on the grass waved at him. A little girl tugged at her mother's hand and said, "That's the man who played the piano." Someone even came over with a warm smile and told him that his music made them think of their childhood. These small moments gave him a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, like he belonged somewhere. But the biggest surprise was waiting near the fountain. The old piano, the same one with chipped paint and uneven keys, had been cleaned. Someone had gently wiped away the dust, and there was a small handwritten sign taped to its side. It said, "Thank you for reminding us how beautiful music can be." He stood there quietly, reading those simple words again and again. He didn't know who wrote it, but the message went straight to his heart. As he sat down on the bench, he ran his hand softly over the keys. This time, there were no laughs, no mocking voices. Instead, the people nearby waited quietly, as though they already knew something special was about to happen. And so he played again, not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but simply because it felt right. The melody that came out was calmer, warmer, like a soft breeze passing through familiar memories. More people gathered as he continued playing. Some stood, some sat on the grass, and others closed their eyes as if the sound reminded them of something long forgotten. What touched him the most was seeing people connect with each other. A man put his arm around his wife. Two strangers smiled at each other. A child clapped in delight. It was music doing what music does best, bringing people together without needing a single word. After he finished, many thanked him. One woman said she had been having a hard week and his music helped her breathe again. A man told him that he used to play piano too, but stopped years ago, and now he wanted to try again. Hearing these things made him realize something important. The music he had kept inside for so long was not meant to stay hidden. It could help people. It could touch lives. And for the first time in many years, he felt proud. Over the next few weeks, new opportunities appeared. A small community center asked him if he would like to play during their weekend gatherings. A local school invited him to speak to their students about staying strong and believing in their passions. He wasn't used to standing in front of groups, but he learned how to share his story little by little. His voice shook at first, but people listened with kindness, and that gave him courage. One afternoon, he was invited to a small event where local musicians performed. When he walked into the hall, he was surprised to find people waiting for him with warm greetings. They introduced him not as the man from the park, but as someone who brought heart back into music. Those words moved him deeply. He never thought he would be described that way again. When it was his turn to play, he sat down at a grand piano. It was polished, smooth, and heavier than the old park piano. But when his fingers touched the keys, he felt the same familiarity, like returning to a place he once knew by heart. He played with honesty, each note filled with the journey he had lived. When he finished, the room fell silent for a moment, then filled with gentle applause, not loud or rushed, but warm, as though everyone there truly understood him. After the event, a young student approached him with shy steps, holding a small notebook. She told him she had been scared to pursue music, thinking she wasn't good enough. But after hearing his story, she wanted to keep trying. She asked if he could write a small message in her notebook. He paused, thinking carefully, and wrote, "Play for yourself first. The rest will follow." The girl smiled with so much hope in her eyes that he felt something shift inside him, a quiet promise that he would never again let fear keep him from the piano. As his life slowly changed, he still visited the park often. The old piano had become a little symbol for many people. Kids came to press random keys and laugh. Young musicians practiced songs while friends recorded them. Couples took photos beside it. People treated it with a kind of respect it had never received before. One day, he discovered that the city had officially restored it. The wood was polished, the keys were repaired, and a small plaque was added to the side. When he leaned in to read it, his chest grew tight. The plaque said, "Dedicated to all who find healing in music, inspired by a man who chose to play again." He stood there for a long moment, unable to move. He had never asked for anything like this. He never tried to be someone important, but life had given him a gift he never expected, a reminder that even the quietest people can leave something beautiful behind. He sat down and began to play again. The sun was setting, the sky turning soft shades of orange and gold. People gathered as they always did now, but he barely noticed them. He was lost in the sound, in the gentle rise and fall of the melody. And somewhere inside, he felt his parents close, not in sadness but in peace. When he finished, he looked around at the small crowd. They were smiling, some with tears in their eyes, others simply moved. For the first time in many years, He felt a sense of completion, not the end of something, but the beginning of a new chapter. He walked home that evening with a lightness in his steps. The world felt different, yet deeply familiar. He knew he would keep playing not for attention, not for applause, but because music was a part of him, something he had once lost but finally found again. And wherever his journey would take him next, he carried with him a quiet truth, sometimes a single moment. A simple question like, "Can I play that old piano?" can open a door to a legacy bigger than anything planned. His legacy wasn't fame or wealth. It was hope. It was healing. It was the gentle reminder that beauty can rise again from places we least expect. And in that truth, he found peace.